EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is out of a job. Faced with an avalanche of scandal and embarrassing headlines over Pruitt's spending and ethics, President Trump broke the news this afternoon with a tweet. I have accepted the resignation of Scott Pruitt as the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Within the agency, Scott has done an outstanding job, and I will always be thankful to him for this. The Senate confirmed Deputy at EPA Andrew Wheeler will on Monday assume duties as the acting administrator of the EPA. I have no doubt that Andy will continue on with our great and lasting EPA agenda. We have made tremendous progress, and the future of the EPA is very bright. The president tweeting that out just shortly ago. Pruitt, meanwhile, has been the subject of at least 15 investigations regarding his practices at the EPA, including his spending on travel, the questionable use of his personal security detail, the room that he rented from the wife of a lobbyist at $50 a night, and the installation of a soundproof booth in his office. For months, President Trump had stood by his EPA administrator. Just last night, Pruitt, in fact, was a guest at the White House 4th of July celebration, where he got a friendly shout out from his boss. As recently as last month, Trump was brushing off questions about Pruitt's future and praising his work.
Scott Pruitt is doing a great job within the walls of the EPA. I mean, we're setting records. Outside, he's being attacked very viciously by the press, and I'm not saying that he's blameless, but we'll see what happens.
In his resignation letter to President Trump, Pruitt said, "It is extremely difficult for me to cease serving you in this role, first because I count it a blessing to be serving you in any capacity, but also because of the transformative work that is occurring. However, the unrelenting attacks on me personally, my family, are unprecedented and have taken a sizable toll on all of us." For more, I'm joined by Heidi Przybyla, national political reporter for NBC News, Aswin Subsang, White House reporter for the Daily Beast, Republican strategist Shermichael Singleton, and Beth Phui, senior politics editor for NBC News. Heidi, let me just ask you, we had the president there with what he said a couple weeks ago. We had Pruitt at the White House last night at the 4th of July celebration. What changed in Trump's thinking, and when did it change?
Well, in his words, he spoke with the press today. He said there was no final straw, Steve, but as an observer, we have to say there was some major stories that broke recently, including about Pruitt actually abusing his staff, putting charges on their credit card and not reimbursing them for them. Then over the weekend, I think, the president's a very visual person. He watches a lot of TV, and what was playing all over the holiday the past couple of days was that mother confronting him at the diner. A few hours ago, then, we just found out from the ranking member on the House Oversight Committee, Elijah Cummings, that there was even more information to come out about him scrubbing his calendars, including potentially a meeting with a cardinal who had been accused of sex abuse. So there was still more revelations to come.
I guess, though, Beth, it still does raise the question. I mean, there had been so much that was already out there. What would the definition of too much be?
Right. And think about it. The first one of these big cabinet people to go down, Tom Price, he was gone so quickly once news had broken that he had been flying around on a military jet and renting charter planes and way overspending. And he was gone. It was clear that he had to go. This has been going on for months and months and months. So many more allegations that ever were leveled at Tom Price. The dripping, constantly going. And Trump always staying in his camp. As Heidi said, President Trump spoke about this resignation of Pruitt on Air Force One tonight and basically said, great guy, love the guy. He just couldn't take it anymore. Things were so tough on him. There was no apology whatsoever in his letter, in Pruitt's letter to the president. So it's very unclear what broke finally at this point. And honestly, Steve, Pruitt in many ways was sort of like President Trump, even though he didn't have the great wealth of President Trump. He was sort of that, let's see how I can push as hard as I can, get away with things, the sort of grifting that many people complain about with the president is something that Pruitt was doing as well. So Trump always sort of seemed to be in his camp, even though the things he was doing were so hard to justify.
Well, one longtime ally of Pruitt, Senator Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma, that's Scott Pruitt's home state, he had last month said that it could be time for the EPA administrator to leave his job. He complained to conservative Fox News host Laura Ingraham that every day something new comes up. Inhofe later backed off that criticism, but Ingraham herself tweeted last month that Pruitt's bad judgment is hurting Trump and that he's got to go. And on Tuesday, Ingraham weighed in again, writing simply, "Pruitt is the swamp. Drain it." Is that, Shermichael, let me bring you in, Republican voice here. we see controversies all the time around this president. What we do not see all the time are allies like Laura Ingraham saying, hey, Mr. President, there's something to this. You better do something here. Is that why Scott Pruitt's gone tonight?
Well, because it appears to be a bit hypocritical when one of the president's key promises or campaign components was he was going to, quote unquote, drain the swamp. He was going to make Washington run more efficiently and be beholden to the American people. And yet you have an alligator in your own administration that thrives in this, quote unquote, swamp. And so I think Laura Ingraham recognizes, and there have been other conservatives that have publicly called for the president to remove Scott Pruitt, that you cannot articulate this message and yet you say, oh, the left has done X, Y, and Z things wrong, and yet you are a hypocrite on a major campaign promise. And conservatism at one point in time stood for law, stood for order, and yet you have a president who has essentially disregarded all of those foundational principles of what it once meant to be a conservative in this country to say, oh, it doesn't matter, we will allow individuals to run amok. And I think finally folks have said we've had enough.
Well, what does that divide look like, by the way, on the conservative side, on the Republican side? Because we have Laura Ingraham out there, say Inhofe had raised concerns. I think Joni Ernst, senator from Iowa, had said some things. There were Republican conservative voices out there saying things like this. Same time, I'm seeing conservatives right now just going and getting some immediate reaction from some, activists, thought leaders, however you want to say it, saying he got a raw deal, saying, Pruitt was basically railroaded by the press, by liberal villains here. What's the divide on the Republican side? How many thought he should go? How many shouldn't?
I think right now the Republican Party is in the midst of a paradigm shift. And I think a lot of individuals are beginning to wonder, is this a temporary moment or is it a permanent moment? I think by all accounts, this is now the party of Trump. And that's why you do have so many leaders who are now going to the activist realm of the party to try to figure out what folks are saying on the ground, because no one wants to get out there too soon and sort of anger that base, if you will, who we know are so loyal to the president.
Well, I'm curious how you read the politics of this one. Is this a president looking at growing concerns with his base and acting on it? Is it a president who perceived a wider political threat and said, we've taken on enough water here? Where do you think it's coming from?
No, I think the president has finally realized that this is just too much. We know for a fact that Donald Trump doesn't like anyone to get more negative coverage than himself. And despite the fact that you can actually point to some tangible things that conservatives may agree to as far as the job that Scott Pruitt has done, I think the ethical issues have sort of overshadowed those things. And the president, in the midst of so many other things lingering with his White House right now, finally made the decision that, you know what, it's time for him to go. I can choose someone else who can do the exact same thing.
Oswin, I guess, does this solve a political problem for the president that's outside of his party, or is this just sort of the president reacting to his party?
Well, it certainly gets rid of a big political headache, not just for the president, who, as you correctly point out, has publicly at least been pretty firmly behind Scott Pruitt for the past several months, even when this avalanche of scandal first started to emerge. But if it were up to White House officials such as Chief of Staff John Kelly and basically everyone from there on down, Scott Pruitt would have been ousted from the EPA yesterday, if not weeks and weeks and weeks beforehand. This is someone who top West Wing officials have wanted gone for a while now, but every time a negative story bubbled up, until very recently, there have been people to whisper in Donald Trump's ear, who are Pruitt's allies on Capitol Hill, conservative media, and the conservative movement, that he had to stay. Obviously, that only took Pruitt so far, but it took him a very long way. What ultimately brought Scott Pruitt down was, among other factors, him waging war on his own staff, some of whom have come out publicly to speak out and blow the whistle against him. If he had not engineered this campaign of smearing his own aides and former aides, there's a chance that this torrent of leaks and testimony wouldn't have come out so aggressively against him.
So what's going to happen right now, Heidi? Because we note that tweet from the president. He gets those two words in there: Senate confirmed for the replacement, Andrew Wheeler, the deputy who takes over as interim. The president pointing out he has been confirmed by the Senate, and that is an issue here with a 51-49 Senate, a department where the policies have been as contentious as they are as EPA here. Are we looking at the permanent EPA administrator here, or do you think this is a White House that's going to look elsewhere?
Depends on how much pressure he comes under from this president. Wheeler is quoted as having said that he did not want the job, that he never wanted the job, but there are a lot of insiders who think he could actually be even more effective than Pruitt was because he is so low-key, but he has the same agenda, in that he might just be more effective. He's not going to draw all of the attention. But I think this is a teaching moment as well, Steve, in terms of what draining the swamp actually means. Look at what it took to bring Pruitt down. It was never about his job. The job that he was doing was never, or the draining the swamp was never about corruption because of all of these things that the president was putting up with. It was about draining the agencies. If you look at Donald Trump's comments, he thought that Pruitt was doing an excellent job. He'd rolled back 22 regulations. He was holding a lot of new regulations at bay. And even folks like Christine Todd Whitman had said when Pruitt came in that this was going to be a danger to the environment, to human health. That is the mission of the EPA, is to protect human health and the environment. And yet what you see is lobbyists like Scott Pruitt and now Wheeler, who is a coal lobbyist, coming in to push through this agenda, which is essentially starving the agency, pushing out civil servants in favor of this more lobbyist-driven agenda. That is going to continue. That is not why Scott Pruitt was fired.
Just quickly, Beth, though, on that point, do you see Democrats, for policy reasons, did not like the idea of Pruitt there? Do you see a continuation of these policies the way Heidi's describing?
Of course, and that's why it was so strange that Pruitt was able to hang on as long as he was, because the next guy or the woman who's going to come in and to replace him is going to pursue the exact same agenda. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, Steve, is like, look at this. This is our list of all the people in Trump's orbit who have gone, who have disappeared since he became president. This is a very long list compiled by our White House unit of all the many names of people who
departures from the administration.
From the administration, and from cabinet officials to staff to spokespeople. This is an administration that just bleeds people. They just go, and it's remarkable that he hung on as long as he did. But he just joins this very, very, very long list of people who have started in some way in the Trump administration and have since departed.
All right.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.